Hi, and thanks for joining me today. I'm Miggy of The Art of Miggy and Studio Miguel. I'm a commercial artist who's passionate about handmade things, painting and drawing and portraiture, all those kinds of good things. Now, being a commercial artist, that means I spend my days making animation, 3D illustrations, retouching, like really slick, finished, polished, glossy stuff that sells product for clients. So when I come home at night, I like to get my hands dirty. I like to fill my sketchbooks. I like to make paintings with pencil and charcoal and all those kinds of good things. Spread paper all over the floor. I like to use the original digital tool with my digits. If you saw my last video, you saw me talking about sketchbook number 62. And you noticed full of ink, full of watercolors, as all of my sketchbooks are. But one of the questions that came out of that is, what ink do you use? How do I know what ink is best for me? So I thought in today's episode we would discuss that very topic. And so it's titled, What the Ink? Very clever, right? So I have before me an array of inks, and I thought we would talk about them, what their different properties are, what I like about them, what I don't like about them, and why ultimately I chose the one ink that I think is superior to everything else that I've tried. Now, to start with, it's interesting because one of the things that crossed my mind is, it's not that hard to make your own ink. In fact, we're going to look at an ink stick in a minute. And so I did a quick Google search, and I was surprised to find that it is very easy to make your own ink. This seems like something I maybe have explored in the past, but had forgotten about. In fact, the National Park Services, of all places, has an article on how to make your own ink. Carbon ink was made of soot, glue, and water. It was popular during the Greek and Roman times, but it was known to smear and fade quickly, which as an artist, you don't want either. Then there's iron gall ink, and it's made from iron salts and tannic acids from vegetable sources. Still sold today. And they have a couple recipes on here: black raspberry ink, black tea ink, coffee ink. So this might be kind of fun to try out if you're interested in experimenting with inks. We'll include the link in the show notes. But let's talk about the inks that I've experimented with and the inks that I've tried. What are the pros and cons? What have I learned from them? And then ultimately, what ink do I use? And I have experimented with a lot of inks. I asked other artists what inks they use. You search the web, you get different answers, find different things. It's harder and harder, though, right? As more and more artists are working digitally, fewer people are going out and buying ink and getting their hands dirty. So maybe something here will be useful to you. If so, tell somebody about it. Be nice to share that with them. So let's look at a few of these inks here that we've got. Starting, we have the old standby here, the Higgins inks. I bought something like this as my very first ink as a teenager. This with a dip pen. All right, you just pop that bad boy right in there, and then you're ready to start writing calligraphy or drawing pictures or whatever the case may be. Now, Higgins says it's waterproof. Most inks say they're waterproof, but at the end of the day, I've found that they're not exactly as waterproof as they say, at least not to the degree that I like them to be. So Higgins is a good one, nice and black, pretty cheap. You can find it anywhere. That's kind of a big thing. Being able to find ink sometimes can be kind of tricky. Now, next ink we have up is the Lamy brand ink. So you can kind of see that there on the top of their bottle. Lamy is a glass bottle. It's got this cool like base to it has like it's a cloth tape. So sometimes when you're dipping ink or even a fountain pen, you get a little too much ink, you need to dab it off. So it's kind of built in right there. That's a pretty nice feature actually. That it has built into that. Now, the reason I bought and tried the Lamy to begin with was because my favorite pen to draw with is, well, originally it was a Lamy Safari, and today it's a Lamy All-Star. And next week I'll talk about pens and why I chose the pen I do, and I have a few others in my stable that I use. And we'll talk about the mechanics of it and the pros and cons and those kinds of things. So I started buying this ink because originally, the inks that we're using, I was finding were too viscous to work well in the Lamy pen. And as a result, what would happen is I'd get inconsistent results. Sometimes the ink would clog or dry up and just was never really great. But this was a terrific ink. like it was specially formulated for their pens. It did a really nice job of flowing, didn't dry up, and it was nice and black, but not waterproof. At least not enough to be able to go back over with watercolors. So this kind of sits on the shelf, even though it's a really nice ink. Now next we have the manuscript ink, and I haven't tried this. My wife picked this up just the other day at Hobby Lobby. She's going to try her hand at some ink work and calligraphy. So I don't know. It's a nice bottle, probably the right amount of ink. I think it's 1 ounce of ink. Yeah, 1 fluid ounce, 30 milliliters. So yeah. What's kind of nice about this, like, so I was talking about like opening size. So you notice that Higgins, which is just a cheap plastic bottle, real narrow. This is kind of nice and wide, easier to spill, but certainly easier to access with your dip pen. Then next on our list here, we have the Sumi inks, right? So Sumi calligraphy, Japanese painting, Chinese painting, people are always using Sumi ink. And these are just nice black inks. They're just good. They're cheap, readily available everywhere. This you, of course, obviously buy in bulk, and we'll show you in a minute how dark that really is. In that family is this ink right here. Yep, that's ink. It's called an ink, well, I call it an ink stone, but technically this is the ink stone. This is the part where you grind the ink stick. That's what this is called, ink stick. So what you do is you pour a little water in here, and you take your ink stick, and you just grind for about, I don't know, 10 minutes, depending on how black you want the ink to be. And what this does is it releases the carbon molecules into the, suspends them into water, so then you dip your brush in, and you just start brushing away. It takes a bit, though, to get a nice black ink. I'll show you what I mean here in just a few minutes with that. So after that, we have this pretty cool ink here from a company in New Orleans called Papier Plume, and they're still in business. I think I bought this ink, man, like in 2006 with a glass pen, which I'll show you in my pens episode what that's like. I thought it was crazy to have just a stick of glass to be able to draw with it, but it's a thing. Anyway, forest green. It's a nice rich green. Good bottle too, man. This has been sitting on the shelf a long time, but it's still just as hydrated as it was when I bought it. Again, not waterproof. So whenever I draw with it, I have to be careful going back over it with watercolors. But it is nice that it says bottled in New Orleans. I don't know if they're making the ink or just buying it in bulk and putting it in their own bottles. It's kind of like home office made labels. So I don't know. It's cool. If you're in New Orleans, stop by Papier Plume, pick up some ink. We'll put the link in the show notes. Then, of course, we have the P.H. Martins. I just picked these up the other day. So I have some P.H. Martins that are watercolors, actually. They're liquid watercolors, hydrous, which are just, they're so beautiful. Like if you like watercolors, these P.H. Martin watercolor inks are really great. It's just like super dense liquid watercolor. And I do use them as inks sometimes with a brush. But really they are watercolors, so you can take them, draw lines with them, and then go back and work them with a wet brush and get some interesting results. So I'm curious to try these. The P.H. Martins, they actually do say on here, waterproof India ink. So that'll be interesting to see what they draw like. I picked these up because they were on clearance at Hobby Lobby, and I love things on clearance. I love art supplies. When I can pick them up cheap, I pick up a lot of them. So I got some colors here and stuff that I haven't actually broken open yet. So it'll be fun to try. I'm interested in this, the matte waterproof India ink by Dr. P.H. Martin. So cool stuff. Yeah, so there's P.H. Martins. That brings us to Pro Black. Now, if you know any cartoonists from the old school who were pre-digital days, they were using Pro Black. This is such a nice ink, and I think studying other cartoonists is where I got into this ink. It is just, it's rich. You of course you use a brush with it. It's thick. It's thinner than honey, but it's thicker than most inks that I've ever used. and it just flows really nice. Like it goes into a sable brush, and just like the sable brush just holds the ink, and you get a nice consistent line with it. So I love this ink. This was the ink that I wanted to use when I started using a fountain pen, but it has two drawbacks. One, it's not waterproof. Two, it's way too thick to work through a fountain pen. Oh, I was so frustrated trying to get this to work. And I tried and tried. I tried thinning it and everything else, and I could never make it happen. So this is great for brushes, but your mileage may vary with a dip pen, and I could never make it work with a fountain pen. So I don't even recommend trying it. But that brings us to my favorite ink, which is Noodlers. I have a lot of Noodlers bottles here. And these are, I think, it's controversial to say, but I think they make some of the best ink. It's very black. The colors are very vibrant. It's got the right amount of viscosity. It works great in a fountain pen. Works great in a brush. Great in a dip pen. And have a huge wide array of colors. Now, if there's one drawback, sometimes they get a little creative with their naming. Like this is what is this? American Eel, which is like a deep red, but you kind of have to know their color system to understand their naming. Plus, like they have black, and then they have Bulletproof black, and I think there's another black, and they're all different amounts of blackness or density to them. But for me, this is my ink. This is what I use on a day-to-day basis, in and out, and this is the ink that I recommend. It works fantastic in fountain pens. It works fantastic in brushes, and especially the Bulletproof. It's color fast, it's pH neutral, it's water-based. It says on the packaging, the only eternal black ink. So if they say it, it must be true, right? It was on the internet, so you have to trust it. Yeah, and I just found out they sell this in a 16-ounce bottle. I didn't know that. I've been buying the 3-ounce bottles for years, which has its own kind of cool factor to it. Like, I keep the empty bottles. I fill them with sand and put them on the shelf. It just looks good up there. Plus, it has this cool factor of every time I see an empty bottle, I know, man, I drew all of that ink. Like, all that went into paper, went into drawing somewhere, which is kind of nice. It's kind of a badge of courage. Now, I can't buy this ink locally. I can only buy it online. And sometimes I get it from Amazon. Sometimes I get it from Dick Blick. I don't think Noodlers actually sells direct. But if we travel and I find it, I'll always buy a bottle. And so I end up with, as you see, several boxes of it because I don't want to run out. I don't want to run out. And I used to have an issue with when the bottle got down low, I'd have a hard time refilling my fountain pen because what you're doing is you're dipping the pen down in and trying to suck up the ink. But I learned a trick when I bought a pen, and it came with a syringe. I thought, what's this syringe for? Well, guess what you can do? You put the syringe in the bottle, you suck up as much ink as you want, you take this, put it into your pen reservoir, bam, you fill it up. I can't believe I didn't know that. I've been using fountain pens for 15 years, and I only just learned that in the last 8 or 9 months. So, yeah, Noodlers is the way to go. It does wipe off of like clay-based papers. It does wipe off plastics, but a good cellulose art paper, it just goes right in and it stays there and it's there forever. So it's really nice because you can go back over it with watercolor, like I said, which is like that's my preferred way to work, and it doesn't go anywhere. So I thought it'd be cool. Let's take a minute and maybe demo some of these inks. Especially, I think I want to show you this because this is kind of an interesting thing most people aren't familiar with. It's actually at a paper store when I ran into that, and I was like, "Oh man, I gotta get this. I gotta try it out." So the way this works is, and we are not going to get very black ink out of this because I don't have the patience to sit here and grind away. But the way it works is you just take a little bit of water, put a little bit. I think just a little bit's all it takes, and you just start grinding. Grind. And they sell different qualities of these grindstones. I have a plastic one. I don't know would want to grind ink in a plastic, I mean, this is just a nice, this one's real heavy. It was only $10 at Hobby Lobby. You could probably go online and find like a really cool one carved from Mount Fuji or something from Japan, if you're really into this. But to me, this is like, you know, part of the meditative process of making art. If you're a calligrapher, and I'm not, but I like to imagine if I was, that this would be part of my process. I would sit, you know, I'd have all my stuff, my paper and my brushes, and I'd sit and I'd go through this process of grinding my ink and getting it just the right viscosity. And, you know, then I'd sit down and I'd be in the zone ready to make art. So let's see what this looks like here. Let me grab a Sumi brush. And again, I'm not a calligrapher, but just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to play one on TV today. So let's see. I'm going to start here. Oh, that's pretty black. Okay, so I did this earlier as a test, and I was using way too much water. So I guess with less water, it is easier to get a blacker ink. So very nice. Oh yeah, that's pretty great. That's pretty great. So you could see if you were seriously a serious calligrapher, you could do this all day, every day. Of course, I think you're doing kanji and not doing like Western letters with this. Or maybe you're painting Mount Fuji, you know, or a boat and waves. So yeah, anyway, so that's how you grind your own ink, for better or for worse. So let's compare real quick how black this is. That's pretty black to what comes in the bottle. Of course, if you want more ink, right, you gotta grind more. But if we just dump some pre-mixed on here, it's interesting too because it looks different in person than it does on camera. Like I can see on camera, like these are really lightening up as they dry. That might as well. Is that bleeding through? No, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. All right, so this is from the bottle. So you'd expect the line is about the same. But what does it look like if we put down a field of black? That's pretty nice. A good black. Yeah, I would say. So you can see, getting it on my fingers there, you can see, you know, our edges are lightening up here that when we ground. I wonder if that'll happen with the bottled ink. Only time will tell. So those are Sumi inks. Same thing with the green bottle here. Of course, you don't have to pour this out. You can work right out of the bottle, which, as I have stated, I don't like because I don't know how far to dip this pen in or this brush. And I'm guessing, did I have ink or not? It's just a black hole. That's a tricky one. I don't think I'm getting into the ink. Oh, there we go. It's pretty thick ink. It might be drying up some. It's been in the bottle for a while. We've got a little guy here. He's got some existential angst. Yeah. So, okay, so that's Sumi inks. You can see here, nice and black. Let's see. Let me rinse out my brush here. And let me show you if you are not a brush user, an ink brush user, let me show you. Of course, you kind of saw the range here, right? You saw the range on thick and thin for, and this is a very, very cheap Sumi brush. Like, you know, These come from China. I'm sure probably cost $2, right? But what if you were to pay like $60 for a brush? Well, these are Kolinsky Sable. These are Winsor & Newton. It's not synthetic. This is actual fur from the tail of the sable. And they're renowned worldwide for their quality to pull a consistent line, to hold ink. They're just beautiful. If you're going to do ink or you're going to do watercolor, you can't go wrong buying these brushes. I've had these for years, and I have ruined a few, but the ones I haven't ruined are just great. The fur never falls out. The bristles never fall out of the ferrule. They work. It's really nice. So, and you can see, like, if I can show you, like, the quality of that line is just so fine, up to a very thick line. And this is a number 2, so they get finer than that, obviously. Go down to 0 and 00 and 000. And so if you're a cartoonist back in the day and you were inking your creation, this would be the way you would do it. I never mastered the brush the way the old timers did, but I do like drawing with a brush. You get happy accidents. And all of these inks work well with a brush. The nicer the brush, the better the ink works, obviously. So if you're interested in that, don't mess around with cheap brushes. I mean, Sumi brushes being what they are, they're designed to give you a certain quality of line. I think if I flip back a page, yeah, I mean, Sumi are great for, like, if you like really crusty, rough edges, cheap Sumi brushes are the way to go. But if you want something that's like a nice, super tight line, you're trying to outline or cartoon character or write something, then get a nicer fine brush. That's really going to give you the best line that you want. Okay, so yeah, so that's the inks. That's the demonstration portion of our inks. We could go through all of these, but you're going to see they're pretty much the same. They're black, right? Or they're colors. Ultimately, it boils down to what works best for you. That's what I always tell people, you know, like what ink I use maybe is not the right ink for you. Although I landed on Noodlers by asking people, right? I landed on Pro Black by asking people what inks that they used. And so I'm hoping that this helps some way. If you're looking for that or trying to figure out what ink's right, then here's a few, and that might do the trick. And ask yourself, what's your intended goal, right? If you're drawing with a dip pen, you're going to use a very different ink than if you're drawing with a fountain pen. You know, fountain pens level of complexity to them that brushes and dip pens don't. You know, all kinds of stuff in here. You have a vascular system and parts that have to be cleaned and things like that. But why use a fountain pen then? Mobility, my friend. You can fill this up and take it with you wherever you want to go. Next week, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about pens, why I choose what I do. It doesn't matter how much you spend. What do you get for what you spend? It's cheap. Is it going to work for you? Okay, so thank you very much. Like I said, next week we'll talk about pens. We'll talk about jet pens and some other companies. Goulet Pen Company is another nice. In fact, I recommend them on YouTube. They have some fantastic, what do you call it? Tutorials on like different pens and things like that, inks and stuff like that. Ultimately, though, it's going to boil down to what works best for you and what you're interested in. You'll probably end up with a big collection of inks like me, and they'll sit on the shelf for years, and you'll feel bad because you never use them. But that's the way inks work, right? We just buy them, and then we find one that we really like. So in closing, I'll just say thank you very much for joining me. It's tough to promote yourself, talk about yourself. I recently wrote a post on my newsletter, which I encourage you to subscribe to, heartofmiggy.substack.com, I think is the URL. I forget. We'll put it in the show notes. I publish there 3 times a week. Sometimes it's poetry or essays. Sometimes it's things like this, talking about useful artistic things. Eventually, we'll start producing a podcast entitled, Are You Afraid of the Art? And the purpose of that is to talk to artists like me that feel like abject failures. And we're always terrified of showing our work to the world because you're all going to laugh at us. But what I'm finding is that's not the case. when we have the courage to get out there and show ourselves and bare our soul, people are accepting of it. And it turns out that in order for people to invest in the art, it's not enough for us to make a good product. You need to know the artist, because when we buy art, what we're really buying is a part of the person. We want to go on their journey with them. We want to support them and encourage them. So that's part of this process. I'm showing you what I do, hoping to build a community and make you my friends. And we can all talk about art and make art together. We can succeed together, fail together, all those kinds of things. So if you see something here you like, share it with somebody. Tell them about it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel or subscribe to my newsletter. Come see me on Instagram at Art of Miggy. Find me on Facebook, Art of Miggy. It's pretty consistent, that name. And just see what I'm up to, what I'm doing. Some things are pretty good, some things are kind of lame, but that's the nature of the beast when you're a creative person. Not everything can be a winner, but you just have to keep going, because eventually you hit something nice. And you know one of my favorite sayings? One of my favorite sayings. What is my favorite saying? No man must sit upon a pumpkin, for that is shiftlessness. That's a pretty good one. But what I was thinking of was the opposite of love is not hate, but indifference. Thanks for joining me. See you next time.